These are the waters of the world's greatest living wonder, the Great Barrier Reef. A bedazzling part of far North Queensland, tropical Australia, and truly a sport fisherman's paradise in the sun. A place far away from crowded cities. A region of warm, transparent waters, lush tropical islands, and stunningly beautiful coral reefs. From above the water or below, it casts its very own enchanting spells. And on top of all that, this whole spectacular system abounds with the most exciting, probably the greatest saltwater sport fishing in the world.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Florence. I'm a sport fisherman. I like to fish for fun, especially in beautiful places like this. Fishing is something that I've been doing since I was about 2, and to live and fish in Barrier Reef paradise country like this is for me a dream come true. This is, in fact, one of the planet's last sport fishing frontiers. Thousands of square miles of tropical reef waters unfished and in places not yet even properly charted. Over 2,000 kilometers of rich coral platforms, tropical island groups, sand cays, and crystal water. It's the planet's most diverse and prolific marine environment, teeming with life. It's exactly the kind of place where even the most ardent of the world's sport fishermen can live out their wildest dream fishing adventures. And the very best thing about it, perhaps, is that you and I are going fishing here. We're going to fish and explore just as much of this fantastic reef country as we can. Along the reef's beautiful edges, we'll be jig fishing and trolling for some of the host of big carnivore reef fish that live in the coral caves and ramparts of the outer barrier. Here there are cod and wrasse, sweetlip, and a dozen more exciting fish, some of them huge, all of them spectacular. And along the big drop-offs, there are pelagic fish too. Big, fast predators that are great fun to catch and a thrilling challenge on light tackle. The mackerels, the tunas, wahoos, trevally and barracuda. We'll also get to explore this special environment's quieter and more fascinating corners. Remote islands with almost unlimited lure fishing and incredible reef life. We'll fish the waters of the blue 20-fathom country between the reefs and the islands, and the coral platforms of the islands themselves. we enjoy some of the unexpected encounters this incomparable wonderland sometimes presents. The variety, the contrasts, the sheer pleasure of spending time in places like these can and does simply take your breath away. As the world's current black marlin capital, the Northern Barrier Reef also turns on some wild marlin fishing, and we get to enjoy plenty of the high-flying, high-stakes billfish action.
Oh, look! Just keep going back. Here he comes.
Light tackle, heavy tackle, on purpose and by accident.
Okay, Gary, let's go! Go, guys, it'll be going any faster. Go faster now. That's the way. That's the ribs away here. Oh, look at him go. Let's go.
Bill fishing in this part of the world produces the kind of action-packed adventure where anything can happen, and often does.
Oh, he goes for a jump. On the other.
Come on, Rhoda, please go here this time.
In all, we'll fish areas of reef up to 1,000 kilometres apart, along a stretch of coast that lies between the beautiful Whitsunday Islands of central Queensland and the almost untouched northern reefs and islets of the Lizard Island region and the fabulous ribbons off Cape York Peninsula. In a further 6 separate adventures, we'll enjoy this incredible fantasy land of fishing to the full, leaving it finally, much as we found it, unspoilt by our progress. Throughout our adventure, most of our fishing will take place close to shore, within 30 nautical miles of the coast. Inshore islands like the Palms Group and Dunk Island are very accessible, all of them light tackle sport fishing paradises, and like Lizard Island, are of continental origin, formed when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age and coastal land masses slowly sank. Beyond the islands, the incredible ribbon reefs are part of the outer barrier, a further 12 nautical miles to seaward. The ribbons mark the edge of the Queensland Trench, a drop-off of hundreds of fathoms, and at this point, at least 100 nautical miles wide, separating the Great Barrier Reef from the isolated detached reefs, like Holmes Reef, another incredible place we'll visit. For me, the most exciting aspect of the reef country is that it is so unexploited. Much of it is just as it was 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, untouched, unspoiled. Professional fishermen have, of course, explored tiny pockets of it, but a lot of the country that you and I are going to fish has yet to see a hook or a lure. Light tackle sport fishing and game fishing has been part of Australia's leisure scene since the mid-1920s. But it was nearly another 40 years before it even got started in the tropical north. And when it did, it began in Cairns, 1,000 miles north of the closest state capital city. From Cairns, sport fishing developed in 2 separate but allied directions. One was among local light tackle enthusiasts and had its beginnings with a group known as the Australian National Sport Fishing Association, and the other was entirely generated by one fish, the black marlin. This is Cairns Marlin Jetty, focal point of Cairns' now famous $10 million a year black marlin sport fishery. That gantry over there, although not the original, each year weighs some of the greatest game fish in the world, some of them weighing in excess of 1,400 pounds. The history of this game fishery is spectacular but short. From its small beginnings to Cairns' undisputed claim today as black marlin capital of the world took only 15 years. The marlin have probably always been here, but the man who more than anyone else has been responsible for all this arrived only in 1964. His name is George Bransford.
I was over here during the Second World War. and was in this area for about a year, and got acquainted with a few local people, plus a couple of the commercial fishermen, and saw a few of their catches of mackerel with these very small black marlin included, and with stories that they had told me, pretty well looked like chances for some big blacks out here.
And big black marlin off Cairns there certainly were. This 1,000-pound-plus fish was the one that overnight in September 1966 focused world attention on Cairns. Not since Peru, 12 years before, had the world seen such a fish. On reunion nights at the Cairns Game Fish Club, everyone remembers the fish well.
Yeah, my word. We put that in the iceworks.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. We put it in the iceworks, and we had to get it out the next day. And it went in the. We took it around town on one of my trucks. Yeah.
In a small bush fishing town in Australia's tropics, 1,000 miles north of the state capital, the big fish caused a lot of excitement. The Cairns game fishing scene would never be the same. And although at the time few people realized it, Cairns itself was about to undergo great change too. Its population of 20,000 was on the brink of a tourism and development bonanza. Like Peru's Cabo Blanco Island before it, Cairns had been suddenly thrust onto the world map by the marlin. At the time, the Cairns Game Fishing Club was very young. The present club was only formed in January 1965, and few locals had even seen a billfish of any kind before. As Game Fish Club President Jock Izart explains, the fish took Cairns a bit by surprise.
Nobody knew they were marlin in the early days. They were always referred to as spearfish. And it wasn't until, I think, George came along that they were actually identified as marlin. Even Zane Grey referred to them as spearfish, and I think it was George Bransford that first identified them as marlin. Then there was some discussion as whether they were black or blue or what they were.
And while there was confusion about the fish, there were also problems of how to handle them. Fish that are 12 feet long and weigh several hundredweight need special facilities. Facilities that Cairns Club had never even dreamt they'd need. A special gantry would be one priority. Game fishing tackle would be another, as George Bransford soon found out. What did you find when you first came to Cairns, George? Was there any game fishing infrastructure at all?
No, there was nothing at all. In fact, I often had trouble finding bits of equipment that I needed, and luckily I brought most everything with me.
Yeah, equipment problems was the trouble, mainly wire and things like that.
Well, everything was fairly primitive in those days, both rods and the reels. The reels have improved vastly. Yeah. The lines have improved tremendously too, so it was a different ball game. It was ever so much harder to achieve what they did in those days.
We didn't have the right equipment. We didn't have the boat handling facility we have today, and Eric's reel only had 400 yards of line on it, little reel. And after about 4 hours, the fish said, "I've had enough of this," and went burp over the horizon. Put it on tape. We never seen the fishing line again.
The facility problem became increasingly pressing. In fact, with the prospect of international visitors, it was embarrassing. A start was soon made on the first gantry, but the problems didn't end there. There was still the matter of boats.
There was a lack of boats, and
dozens of anglers wanting to go and fish, and
we've had fellows sitting on wharves waiting for cancellations for days.
In the 1920s and 30s, big game fishing in Australia was in its infancy, in states like New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and South Australia. And if you went big game fishing in those days, you used tackle like this: split cane rod with a tulip tip, cutty hunk line, and a custom-built reel made in Australia. And in those days, North Queensland hadn't even given a thought to game fishing or sport fishing. And it wasn't until the early 60s, about 30 years after men first hunted great white sharks off South Australia with this tackle, that it was even possible to hire a boat in a place like Cairns to go big game fishing. The first boat that was available for anything approaching black marlin charter work was this one, Vince Lassoff's Tropic Seas.
After I came out the army in '44, I went fishing, and that was in 1944. In 1947, I built this boat, and then I found a lot of people who wanted to go out on a fishing trip, And I used to take some people out on my professional trips. And then in about 1950, that was 3 years after we built this boat, I had a call to go crocodile shooting. So then I knew nothing about that, so this was really the first full-time charter work I'd done in 1950. So it was crocodiles, and then we'd go up the coast. These were generally a 21-day trip. Right. And we'd go up the coast quick as we could. We got into the rivers of Princess Charlotte Bay. We'd shoot there, and then of course we've got to come home nearly 200 miles, so then we'd follow the reef down for 200 miles. We'd get the shelter away from the southeast wind, and of course on the way down we trolled our lines, and if the weather was good we'd go outside and look for bigger fish, and at the night time we go up behind the reefs and we caught a few red emperor and a few trout and things like that. So then it became a full-time job just doing charter work.
So you'd be about the first people catching marlin in recreational fishing terms off the Cairns coast here.
From the recreational point of view, before the present game fishing club, there was another game fishing club started, but there wasn't enough infrastructural facilities for these people to probably operate in the way they'd like to. And I took a few of their people out and we hooked a few marlin for them. Eric Hebron, we had one particular day, we're outside number 2 river, and I said, well, let's do what the Japanese do. Put our baits down 60 fathoms. And we just bailed off 60 fathoms of line and let the bait sink. And before Eric could eat his dinner, away his reel was going. And then we didn't know what he had, you know, a shark or tuna or marlin. We was only hoping to be a marlin. And my word, it was a marlin. It was a beauty. Came up, didn't even lift his body out the water. But looking back in hindsight, that fish was well over 1,000 pounds. That was the first really big fish hooked here.
When was that?
Oh, that would have been somewhere, I couldn't tell you the precise year now, but it had probably been about 65 or 64.
So that was before George Bransford got things underway here?
Yeah, that was before George stirred things up. And as these charters came to an end, we came back to move into the game fishing because this was an avenue where I could get the boat to earn its own living. Bob Dyer had been in contact with me quite a lot in discussions of where to fish and what time of the year to fish. So then we put our heads together, and Bob and Dolly and his crew, Jack Farrell and Charlie Chambers, we joined forces, and in October 1968 we'd done the first marlin survey from here to 1.5 mile openings to the north of Lizard Island. And Bob wrote that no man alive has seen more marlin in such a short time as we did on that one particular expedition. Yes, we had some reasonably good battles, but we didn't have any monsters on. But at the time, as I said before, this boat wasn't fully equipped for that type of operation. We found some pitfalls we had to modify later. And but on the other hand, Bob tagged quite a few fish. I wouldn't know by memory how many he got. We got enough at any rate to establish we had a pretty hot fishing ground to the north of Cairns.
So the Cairns marlin sport fishery was on its way. The more trips Bob Dyer and Vince Vlasov made, the more fish they caught. But it was left to George Bransford to pave the way for the new charter industry. George, can you remember that first big black marlin, the first one you ever saw?
Oh, we were wandering along to catch anything we could, and a big black come up on the baits, and quite a big black at that.
Yeah.
I imagine quite well over 1,000 pounds.
I bet you felt pretty excited about that.
Yeah, we did. That was the beginning of the whole thing for us.
After you caught that big fish, opinion changed a little bit about George Bransford and Cairns, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Not right away. They thought at first was, well, it was a freak thing that happened, you know, a great big marlin like that. Well, nobody else had been bringing them in. And it took another fish or two to make the people around town perk up and realize that they were there.
Back in those early days, George, did you ever give any thought to what you were starting? Did you ever dream that you'd be starting a multi-million-dollar tourist industry such as we have in Cairns today?
Oh, I didn't expect the whole thing to blossom out as quick as it did. I was getting telegrams, letters, phone calls, and everything else, and anglers from other places, and even asking me whether they should bring insect lotions with them or bring their own lures, and were there any places to stay.
There were places for anglers to stay in Cairns then, but not many of international standard. Today, it's a different story. Since the first big marlin was caught here, building developments have increased 500% to be worth nearly $40 million annually. By the late 70s, game fishing in Cairns was judged to earn the city $10 million a year, and Cairns' population had doubled. The big fish spawned other industries too, like boat building. Harold Collis was the first involved.
We were working on a boat for Doug Scullett in Port Douglas. Yeah. And George walked in or came in around the shed and had a bunch of photographs. I stopped to talk to George and showed me the photos, and Alan walked in to get something. I said, hey, come here. Had a look at these fish. He nearly went out of gear too. So eventually George asked the question, could I build a boat to go fishing to catch these fish that he showed me the pictures of? I said, yes. Well, I said, you show me a picture of it and we'll build it, which we did. And that Sea Baby was the result of that. You said you wanted about 10 knots or 12 knots out of it?
Yeah, that's what
and we got about, what, 15 to 17 out of it?
Tops, yeah.
And she was a lovely little craft.
It's a good little boat.
Oh, she had a beauty.
I've heard it's still going somewhere, but I don't know where.
Down Tullis Beach.
Local boat builders, in fact, built a third of the Cairns fleet. And as the marlin sport fishery grew, so did more diverse enterprises, like that of Ian Pike.
Originally, I saw these Americans catching fish and flying them back to the States to get mounted or taxidermed, as you say, and I thought...
whole 1,000-pounders.
The whole thing. They used to charter a plane and take it back to hang up in their houses or their restaurants as trophies, and I thought, well, there must be an opportunity here to be able to do it on the spot, and that's basically how I got into the business.
Did you know anything about it, or did you have to start from scratch?
Absolutely nothing. It was like you know, like as far as astronomy goes, I know absolutely nothing. But I had a bash, and as I said, my technique is completely original, and I taught myself, and fortunately I was successful because as it's turned out, they're superior to other ways of making fish, you know. I call myself basically an artist, not a fish stuffer or a taxidermist, and I do something that people are pleased to have. And that's basically what I go in for, you know.
In the first 3 seasons, most marlin fishing was done close to Cairns, but as the boats tried waters further north, the trip out and back in one day took too long, and by the early 70s, mothershipping had become part of the marlin scene. The game boats could now stay out on the reef. Small temporary bases would be set up for the season at places like St. Crispin's and Escape Reefs. Motherships were introduced here by Sydney angler Bob Oliver.
Oh, the motherships started possibly 2 to 3 years later than that. I had already sent up a 63-foot motor sailor intended to be used for cruising purposes, and when I arrived I still had the 38-footer that I'd been fishing with down south up here, and the boys on both boats said to me, well, what about taking both boats? It was one for them and well, 2 for them and 1 for me, I think, but we did it, and I was very pleased that we did. We went to St. Crispin's. We spent most of the time in the vicinity of there, fishing opal and Opal Ridge and Linden Bank, and with the mothership anchored mainly at St. Crispin's, and they used to fish for bait for us during the day, and it gave us a very full day fishing.
So it was more or less an accidental discovery, the mothership concept?
It was really, but we had such a ball that on the scuttlebutt that went over the radio, when I came back to port, there was a chap named Bill Chapman from the States who was wanting to charter the smaller boat.
I remember Bill.
And he took both boats. And he had such an exciting time that he cabled his friends in the States. And that was really the first interest in the mothershipping.
The mothership idea, of course, is enormously expensive. Do you think it will price itself out of the market?
Well, that's the basic reason that I feel that there will be a trend towards the other type of fishing, the other class of boat. The motherships are beaut, there's no doubt about that. They're comfortable to stay on at night, and provided that one can meet the financial cost of them, they're excellent.
Today, motherships have changed the Marlin scene. Most fishing now is done away from Cairns, at places like the Ribbon Reefs and off Lizard Island.